The automatic doors at Hillrist General Hospital hissed open, their sharp sound cutting through the morning air as chaos began to unfold. It was supposed to be just another ordinary shift, the kind where nurses still clung to their coffee cups, eyes heavy with sleep, and doctors glanced over patient charts under the harsh glow of fluorescent lights. But then, everything shifted in an instant. Out of nowhere, a German shepherd, dirty and limping, appeared at the entrance. His fur was matted with a mix of dried food, dirt, and city grime. He bolted through the doors like something from another world. In his mouth, hanging limply with each step, was a black garbage bag, an odd thing to bring into a hospital. The chaos erupted. The floor nurse let out a scream. A lab tech's coffee spilled across the counter, and within seconds, security was called to handle the situation. "Get it out of here!" someone shouted, panic rising in the air. The dog, however, didn't bark or growl. He didn't seem angry or frightened. He moved with an unsettling calm, a strange precision that sent chills down the spine. His head was low, his eyes sharp and calculating, as though he had a specific purpose, a goal he was determined to reach. Without hesitation, he weaved between chairs, wheelchairs, and startled visitors, navigating the chaos with ease. There was no collar, no leash, just an eerie focus on his path. At the nurse's station, the commotion grew louder. Phones rang off the hook. One of the guards grabbed his baton while another radioed in for backup. But amidst the flurry of activity, there stood one person who didn't flinch, didn't panic. Nurse Emily Carter, 33 years old, stood still, her eyes fixed on the dog. She didn't shout or retreat. Instead, she moved forward, her instincts honed by a decade of handling emergencies telling her that something was off. Something about the dog's behavior that didn't sit right. Step by step, she approached. And when the dog came to a stop in front of her, he gently placed the garbage bag on the ground at her feet. Emily felt a cold chill creep up her spine. Her heart skipped a beat. Without a word, she crouched down, her breath catching in her chest. She reached out slowly, almost instinctively, for the top of the bag. She ignored the murmurs from the crowd around her, the warnings that told her to stay back, to be careful. She opened the bag with trembling hands, and then time seemed to freeze. For a moment, all the noise of the hospital, the ringing phones, the hushed voices faded into a hollow silence, as if the world itself held its breath. What she saw inside made her stomach drop. A baby, tiny. Its lips were a pale, unnatural blue, and it was wrapped in a blood-stained towel. The umbilical cord was tied off with something crude, a shoelace, of all things. The baby didn't cry. There was no loud wail to alert the world. Instead, there was only a faint, weak gasp of sound, a fluttering of breath that barely stirred the air. Her skin was ice cold, sending a wave of panic through Emily's chest. "Oh my God," Emily whispered, her voice cracking with disbelief. She repeated it, louder this time. "Call NICU, now." Her words cut through the chaos, sharp and urgent, like a surgeon's scalpel slicing through the mess of confusion. The nearest nurse rushed to grab the wall phone, while two others sprang into action. A gurney was quickly wheeled over, and Emily, with hands that shook but still held a steady resolve, carefully scooped the baby up, cradling her close to her chest, trying to offer warmth and comfort. The German shepherd didn't move. He remained still, watching with unwavering focus. His gaze never left the child, his eyes locked on the baby as though he was ensuring her safety. He didn't make a sound, didn't shift an inch. He simply observed, his quiet presence adding to the strange gravity of the moment. Where did she come from? Someone murmured in disbelief. Who would? But Emily didn't hear the questions. Her mind was locked on the baby, her focus narrowed to the tiny, fragile life in her arms. One hand supported the baby's fragile neck, while the other searched for any sign of life. She whispered softly, urgently, "Stay with me, little one. Come on, you're not done yet." At that moment, the NICU team burst into the hallway, moving as though they were part of a well-oiled machine. They immediately surrounded Emily, transferring the baby to their skilled hands. Monitors were attached in stride, vital signs being read as the team worked in perfect coordination. Emily stood back, her arms now empty, her chest heaving with relief and exhaustion. She turned her gaze to the dog. He had done what he came to do. Without a word, without any further indication, the German Shepherd met her eyes. A slight nod of his head, as if to acknowledge that his task was complete. Then he sat down, still as ever, watching the scene unfold as if he had never been part of the chaos, as if his job for now was finished. Emily Carter had always loved children. She was the aunt who brought science exits, instead of dolls who remembered birdies, who knew how to braid hair and explain the phases of the moon in a way that made kids slaw, but Emily Carter would never be a mother. She had known since she was 16 a rare congenital condition confirmed after. A series of painful clinical appointments had rendered her unable to carry a child. There had been tears. Back then rage quiet nights filled with wine questions, but she had learned to live with it. Mostly she poured herself into nursing, first in pediatrics, then trauma, and eventually neonatal care. Saving babies became her mission. It gave her purpose even as the absence in her own life carved deeper with each passing year. At home, she shared a modest apartment with her husband Nate, a structural engineer with kind eyes and a steady presence. He never made her feel broken, never once blamed her. They talked about adoption, even foster care. But life and schedules and uncertainty always postponed the next step until now, as Emily sat outside the NICU hands. Still trembling from adrenaline, her thoughts circled that tiny blue-lipped infant. That child had no name, no parents. Just a blood-stained towel, a garbage bag, and asailant cry that somehow found its way to her. She didn't believe in signs, but today felt different inside the ward monitors. Beep doctors moved with calculated urgency. Emily watched through glass, her heart cracking open wider than she'd ever let it before. She didn't know how or why that baby had come into her life, but she did know this much: she wanted her to stay. They didn't know his name. Truthish didn't really have one anymore. He was just another stray, to most a battered German shepherd wandering the streets like so many others. Some kids called him Ghost, others Phantom. He came and went without warning, slipping between alleyways and shadows like smoke. But his dog was no ordinary stray. Years ago had been something else entirely. Trained at a military canine facility in Texas, he'd responded to commands with razor-sharp obedience, drilled daily with handlers who treated him more like a soldier than a pet. He had once worn a vest, had once been assigned to a team. Then came the Messiah verses. Dust, noise, heat, the kind awfulness where instincts meant life or death. He'd done his part. Detected, reached, tracked down dangers, protected humans who spoke to him in firm, Butkin voices, until one night the explosion came out of nowhere. The sound fire, the chaos. He tried to return to his handler, but got turned around, and smoke screams filled the air. When he emerged from the rubble, his unit was gone. No scent trail, no familiar voice, just silence. He waited days, past, then weeks. Eventually he was picked up by a cargo unit and flown stateside, but the paperwork was a mess. No microchip registered. No one came to claim him, so wandered. 5 years on the streets had taught him the language of survival. He knew which alleys were safe, which dumpsters yielded better leftovers, which humans to avoid and which to accept food from without making eye contact. He'd known commands once followed orders, but that world had crumbled behind the sound of explosions and the taste of taser dust. Now he'd live day by day. Morning he began his route, a silent patrol through the neighborhood. He'd sniff for scraps behind Elgo's dinner, pause by the laundromat, where an old man sometimes left water out, then sleep under the abandoned church's awning. He went looking for trouble. He wasn't looking for anyone, but that didn't mean wasn't watching. He didn't chase catch, didn't bark at mailmen. He moved like a phantom, present but never quite seen just surviving until one early morning something shifted that. Morning had started like every other. The shepherd, still without a name, had begun. His usual loop past the overgrown alley near Tire Shop down to the fence break behind the middle school, then toward the backlot of Elgo's Diner where the scent offering eggs and burnt toast lingered long after closing. He didn't expect anything new, just maybe a half a 10 burrito, or stale fries if he was lucky, but as he approached the dumpster behind the diner he stopped cold. There it was, faint but unmistakable, not food, not garbagasoming alive. He lowered his head and crept forward. The scent grew stronger, milk blood, something delicate and human thin. He heard it, a sound so soft it barely qualified as a cry, a thin breathless whimper, the kind of noise a soldier would recognize instantly. The sound of something slipping away. The shepherd nudged the black garbage bag with his nose. It shifted inside, wrapped in a worn towel, was a newborn baby. She wasn't moving much. Her skin had a bluish tint and her limbs looked fragile as paper, but she was alive, barely. He stood frozen for a moment, instincts clashing, flee, freeze, forget, but another sound escaped her lips, smaller than the first, and in that moment something shifted inside him. Maybe it was memory, maybe training, maybe something older. He gripped the edge of the bag with his teeth. The weight wasn't much. He'd once carried gear twice this heavy, then headed limping toward the only place he remembered from another life, a hospital back at Hillrist. General panic hadn't faded. Security guards had formed a semicircle, radios crackling as they tried to herd the German shepherd back toward the doors. He was panting, no blood on his paw from where glass had cut him on the pavement. The garbage bag still hung from his jaw. He's aggressive, keep back, one of them warned, but Emily didn't move. She'd seen aggression before. Real aggression, this wasn't it. There was no foam, no growl, no snapping, just purpose. The dog locked eyes with her again. It wasn't letting, it was trusting. She stepped forward slowly, cautiously. "It's okay," she whispered. "You're safe here." Heading back away instead, he lowered his head and placed the bag gently at her feet. Emily knelt hard, tutoing all over again, and peeled the bag open like for only now nurses and guards watched in frozen silence. She unwrapped the towel. The baby had grown colder. Her skin was a pale blue glow now, but her chest was still rising, barely right now. Emily shouted again. Their response was instant. The team had been in standby ever since the baby was swept away. For the second time that day, fighting for life, Emily turned back to the dog, who was still sitting where she left him, tail still, ears high. She reached out, hesitant, open palm. To her surprise, he didn't flinch. For the first time in 5 years, someone touched him without fear, and he let them just for asking long enough to feel the warmth of a stranger's gratitude. The hospital lab confirmed it. Within hours, the infant Hayden, extremely rare blood type AB negative, was so uncommon that only a fraction off the population could safely donate, but in a twist that no one could explain, Emily Carter was one of them. It saved the baby's life. A rush transfusion stabilized the infant long enough for her lungs to respond to treatment. She was still fragile, still critical, but breathing on her own while the NICU team worked. Hospital staff examined the bag the dog had carried in. Tucked beneath towel, almost missed entirely, was a folded note written in hurried, uneven handwriting. "Her name is Leia, please. Love her, I can't, but she deserves better than." Emily read the words twice, heart squeezing. It wasn't just abandonment. It was surrender, guilt, maybe even love twisted by fear and hopelessness. Now Leia had a name, a Namia blood match, and a room full of nurses. Will refused to let her die. Emily sat outside the nursery, staring at the note. Time her lap. No family had come forward. No missing person report matched. It was as if Leia had simply appeared, except she hadn't. A stray dog had found her, had carried her, had waited, and since that moment he hadn't left the hospital doors each day. As Emily walked past the front lobby, he was there, sitting, watching, waiting, not begging for food, not asking to come in, just there, like he still wasn't done. The day turned into weeks. Illa's condition improved slowly. Her skin warmed, her eyes opened, her breathing steadied. The NICU staff grew attached. How could they not? But it was Emily who lingered the longest after shifts, reading quietly at her bedside, holding her tiny fingers during feeding sessions her husband. Nate came to visit one evening holding 2 coffees and a quiet smile. He stood by the glass watching his wife cradle Ackle. Neither of them expected. "She looks natural with her," one nurse whispered, and she did. The Paco Fed option began cautiously, then seriously, and officially Leia had no listed parents. No one came forward. The hospital's legal team started the process, and when Emily and Nate signed yet their first set of papers, something in Thea shifted like the pieces of a broken life. Finally beginning to fit that wasn't the end of the story. On the day they were cleared to bring Leia home, Emily stepped out of the hospital with the baby bundled in soft yellow blankets. And there he was, the shepherd, still limping, still watching. He followed them down the sidewalk, stopping Nili. When they reached the front steps off their apartment building, Emily turned the baby in arms and looked at him. "You brought her to me," she said softly. Fittig stood still. "You're not just a stray, are you?" He looked away, almost shy. He hesitated, then called out for the first time, "Ranger." He looked up. He hesitated briefly, as if tasting the name, then pressed forward. "You want to stay with US watch over her together?" He didn't bark, didn't wag, but he stepped forward and gently pressed his muzzle against Emily's leg. News travels fast in hospitals, faster still when a story breaks through the sterile walls and touches something deeper. Hope. A few weeks after Leia came home, Hill Rescanero received a call from a local news station they had heard about. The stray dog, about the abandoned infant, about the nurse who stayed long after her shift was over. They wanted to tell the story. Emily hesitated at first. Her world had already changed so much. Did she really want to share something so personal? But then she looked at Leia asleep on Nate's chest and at Ranger curled quietly at the foot of the cushion, ear twitching at every sound. Maybe the world needed this in that moment. Vulnerability became strength, not just for them, but for everyone who watched. So she said yes. The news segment was simple, shot on a quiet Tuesday morning in the NICU hallway. Emily wore her scrubs. She didn't rehearse. She spoke plainly about being unable to have a children, about the ache she thought buried, about a dog who could have ignored a sound behind a dumpster but didn't. "I didn't save her," she said. He did. He just picked up where he left off. The video spread quickly, first to local viewers, then to wider circles. Soon Emily's inbox was filled with messages of love, gratitude, and heartbreak. People told her their own stories of loss, of healing, of stray animals who'd led them home, and through it all Ranger stayed close. Never far from Leia's side, not barking, not loud, just present, watching over the little girl he had once carried through the chaos and now perhaps carried into a new kind of peace. Festery reached farther than anyone expected. One morning a woman stood outside Emily's apartment building, nervous, pale, holding a worn tote bag close to her chest. She didn't knock, she simply waited. Emily noticed her from the window. There was something fragile about the woman's stance, something familiar in the eyes that wouldn't quite meet her own. "Her name is Leia," the woman whispered when Emily opened the door. Her mother, her voice was soft, tentative, as though she feared forgiveness might never come. Her voice cracked on the last word. They sat in the living room. Leia slept peacefully in Nate's arms. Ranger rested nearby, ears alert but calm. The woman, her name was Marissa, told her story in pieces. A pregnancy she hadn't planned, a life unraveling, a darkness that crept in after the birth, postpartum depression so heavy she couldn't breathe under it. "Ill left her because I thought she'd be better off," Marissa said, tears streaking her cheeks. "I was wrong, I know that now." Emily didn't say much. She listened, held the silence gently. "I'm not here to take her," Marissa added quickly. "I just wanted to say thank you for loving her. It wasn't closure, but it was something." They made a quiet agreement. Marissa could visit not as a mother, perhaps not yet, but as someone who once brought Leia into this world. Ranger approached her that day, sniffed at her hand, then walked away with no signal of fear. Maybe that was enough. Leia grew up surrounded by steady love. Emily taught her patience. Nate taught her how to build things and fix what's broken. And Ranger, older now, slower, never left their side. He watched over her first steps, her scraped knees, and her quiet victories. She didn't know where she came from, but she always knew where she belonged, and from her story One truth stood clear, family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's the strangers will stay, the hands that reach out, and the hearts that choose love over judgment. It's where real beginnings are.